Hello, my name is Harry Gian. My first question is to Mark Morey. The title of the meeting today is Why the Government Interferes with the Union. I have to say the government is doing what is good for the government, what the unions are doing that is good for the workers. The unions pay lots of money to send politicians to parliament through the ALP. And instead of sending productive people for the workers, we send imbeciles to parliament. The unions have become the ATM of the New South Wales Labour Party. When the unions, they're gonna wake up to themselves and stop that rotten situation and start sending those unproductive politicians so we, the workers, can see better days in Australia. Could you please tell us, Mark, sincere?
Harry, good to see you again.
Thank you, Mark.
Always good to see you, Harry. Look, I think it's a valid question, mate, and I think that what you'll find in the union movement today is a diverse range of unions who support a diverse range of parties. And I think that many of the unions today are not just handing over cash as they once did in the 70s and those sorts of eras. Many of the unions today have political action accounts that they set up, and they will support people who support them. People who support their interests and the workers' interests that they actually represent. I think you'll find most of the money that goes to the political parties are from the big end of town, depending on which way the swing is on. I think that unions today are far more considered in the way in which they do in fact spend their money. I think unions are far more considered today in the way in which they support political candidates. And I think it should be remembered that, I know for the ALP, that 50% of conference is made of rank and file members. It's not just all the unions. And that is a challenge to the union movement for us to be in a position where we train, support, and advocate for good people who represent workers. Now, I'd like most of those good people to stay in the union movement, but let's not forget, the union movement set up the ALP to have a political wing and a political voice. And more than ever, we need a political voice. And I say to many people, I say, look, I don't care what politics you get involved in on the left, but get involved in politics. Have a say. And there's a culture in this country where we say, oh, how bad this is, how bad this party is, and how bad that party is, and they haven't done this and they haven't done that. Because we've vacated that space as activists. We've vacated that space as workers. And I'm not saying go out there and stack branches and, you got your extended family there and your neighbour's extended family. What I'm saying is, the union movement and working people cannot sit on the sideline and throw stones and say the parties are shit, whether it's the Greens, the ALP or the Shooters, whoever else, and not get involved. You've got to get involved. And the only way to change it is for people to get involved. Now, for the union movement, that's about working with people, educating people, giving them avenues to actually participate and the skills to do that. And the union movement's very good at that with our training our delegates, training our members and doing that. But this sitting on the sideline, this constant griping about it not changing, of course it's not going to change unless people get involved. And I know that the unions I work with, I know Dan's union, is very active with its members saying the same thing. You can complain, you can keep complaining, but nothing will change. You have to get involved. That's the challenge. The challenge is if you want to change things, people have to get involved.
Yeah, hi, Kieran Howard, Management Committee of the PIP. Thank you very much for your informative speech. I have a bundle of questions, but I'll be quick. The Australian Workers' Union has, according to the Registered Organisations Commission and the Murdoch Press and the Turnbull government, committed the crime of donating in 2006 around about $100,000 to assist in the establishment of a progressive independent advocacy group, Get Up. How does this compare to the largest single donation ever made by a sitting politician, Malcolm Turnbull's $1.755 million wedge to the Liberal Party in July 2016, a fact withheld from voters for months? And doesn't this extraordinary abuse and waste of police resources and overtly political use of the AFP undermine the independence, professionalism and integrity of the Australian Federal Police? And is not this whole sorry saga a shameful new low for a government already scraping the bottom of the political barrel? And in addition, the Reserve Bank recognises that wages in Australia have flatlined.
Hang on, he's trying to write it all down. Hang on.
Even an institution like the Reserve Bank recognises that wages in Australia have flatlined and has called for an increase in wages. Doesn't the government's continued attack on organised labour, the only effective means of raising wages and increasing real effective demand, ultimately destroy the economy and endanger our democracy? Unions being an essential part of our civil society.
Thanks very much. So yeah, a couple of things. Yeah, obviously there is a little bit of a difference between a couple of $1 million donation and a $100,000 donation made. Absolutely no doubt. The police resources question, obviously, like we said, there were around 38 people that were in attendance. The AFP came out to try and correct the number that were actually police, which kind of led us to wonder who some of the others were. But the interesting thing of that was there were, at least I was in Melbourne at the time when it was being raided, and I flew back to Sydney late that night. The police in Melbourne went out of their way to point out that this was probably one of the stranger raids they've ever been in their life, and went to great lengths to try and sort of reassure and comfort us and a lot of the staff that were there as well, that they weren't particularly joyed with what they were being involved in. For me, I've always traditionally thought of our police forces being, it's that old saying, tough cop on the beat, right? Going out to fight real crime. Not a donation that was made by unions 11 years ago, that was endorsed by their executive and that was declared to the AEC, that somehow a matter that we need to raid officers for 4 pieces of paper, as I said. And obviously the challenge of all of this, and to your question, the challenge of all of this, what it does, and as I said before in my speech, we've now got a huge amount of resources having to get put in terms of engaging lawyers to be able to fight all of these actions. And it doesn't matter how much you want to say it doesn't, it does distract from a lot of the core business that needs to take place. And that core business right now is obviously trying to fight to improve the wages and conditions of workers who are at an all-time low in terms of lack of wages growth, at an all-time high for inequality, and at an all-time high, I think, for cost of living pressures for most of us. And so, ironically, there's never been a better time to be a member of a union. At the same time, the unions are doing everything they can to fight for their survival with some of the attacks that we're facing. And so, I don't think it's any sort of surprise that some of the attacks are designed that way. You only need to look at the Royal Commission. The Royal Commissions before that are all designed to try and put in stringent policies and procedures and practices to trade unions to restrict their ability to represent working people.
My name's Jeff Lee, former member of the Omnibus and Tramways Employees Association, the buses union, prior to its amalgamation into the RTBU, which is the Rail Tram Bus Union, a nationally organised union despite what its State Secretary told someone at the meeting at Ryde Golf Club 2 weeks ago. It's a nationally organised union. Now, I think, and I've asked both the Union's New South Wales spokesperson, Mr. Morey, and the other speaker tonight, if they were prepared to undergo some critical questions rather than just the Dorothy Dixer that Peter just served up to them, because we're all on the same side here, and I support their speeches, and I think as a former trade unionist in that union, the Teachers Federation and the TWU when I was a taxi driver, I'm prepared to say I support unions. So don't get me wrong, but I feel that there has to be some critical comments made. One to Mr. Morey. When the government announced it was going to privatise Area 6, Leichhardt, Tempe, Burwood and Kingsgrove bus depots in May last year, Unions New South Wales, with the RTBU, launched a public campaign with stickers, posters and certain public meetings. By October, November, with 30,000 signatures presented to Parliament House, where there was absolutely no media coverage, on October the 12th and November the 16th, with the Labor Council or Unions New South Wales steering the rally over superannuation from the CFMEU and the MUA and the other unions down to the Perfume Gardens behind Parliament House, when Alex Classens and Mr. Preston assured me at Ryde Depot 3 days before that it was going to confront Parliament House over the privatisation of the buses. It was led down to the Perfume Garden behind St Mary's Cathedral, and the 10,000 workers there did not confront the government over the privatisation of the buses. Since then, I've spent $4,000 out of my own pocket organising community pickets in support of the bus drivers outside the 12 government bus depots, while Unions New South Wales and the RTBU have done absolutely nothing apart from a few PR bits on behalf of the opposition leader Luke Polly, where he carries around his own private camera crew to use those little tiny pickets at Ryde Depot and Burwood Bus Depot and outside Chris Sidoti's office in Drummoyne.
Question, Jeffrey.
The guts of it is Unions New South Wales are not campaigning to stop the privatisation of government buses. Everybody knows that the 4 depots are going to be privatised on July 1st, services are going to be cut, the drivers are all going to lose their jobs or retire, and I spoke to 4 Leichhardt bus depot guys today who've got, facing the end of their careers. Now don't tell me to shut up. I've got to make this point here because it's the only opportunity for Unions New South Wales and the other unions to come out and say they'll continue to fight to the death the privatisation of public buses and trains in this country, because the berries have already gone. Unions New South Wales have sat on their asses and done nothing for the last 6 months. We know Luke Polly's going to use it as an election campaign for February next year, and nothing's happening. I want some of your resources and some of the local council resources to fight, even if you don't want to. Twice you've had the Fair Work Tribunal, and I'll wind up on this point.
Jefferson,
Fair Work Tribunal has put bans twice on the union. Look, you're the one who complains about the Okay, I'll ask the question.
Yeah, what is the question?
Given the history of the Labor Council and Unions New South Wales, from John Ducker through to Carl Batar, through to Mark Arbib, all saying they report to the US Embassy or are former CIA agents, what's the difference between you now, Mark Morey, killing the buses stone dead and allowing foreign buses to be imported and foreign workers to be imported into this country and forcing government employees out of their jobs. I thought the Labor Council stood for the working man. Why don't you let them strike? Why don't you call them out instead of just going on with hairy-fairy, let's all stand together. The workers want to fight. You sold them out. You and Luke Polly and the RTBU bureaucrats.
I'm disappointed that you didn't mention my the bloke that employed me, Michael Costa, in that rant. But
yeah.
there's a couple of things.
Union delegates voted to strike last year, and you came along a week later and told them you can't have a 12-depot strike, you can only have a 4-depot strike. Try and deny that in public.
That's not what I said. That's not what I said.
There was a 4-depot strike.
That's not what I said. There's a couple of things in this, probably more than a couple. I could go for a while, I reckon, here. The march you're referring to was in relation to the CFMEU and the construction unions and many other unions participated in. That march was always going to end up where it ended up because we couldn't march to Hyde Park because they were doing turf there, changing the turf.
Parliament House, according to Chris Preston,
Well,
outside
I don't know. I don't know what you've been told, mate. But this is what I know because I organised it. In this state, mate, there has been more industrial action in my time as secretary than there has been the last 10 years. We've just finished running a campaign where this Liberal government tried to privatise five regional rural hospitals.
We know about that campaign. What about the
Hang on, mate. You're asking me. We stopped the privatisation of 5 hospitals.
Yeah.
Mate, mate, you might like hearing this, but this is what's happening, and it mightn't fit with your agenda, and that's fine. But we stopped the privatisation of 5 hospitals in a government that was trying to private, a Liberal Conservative government at the height of their power. Now, we ran a community-based campaign.
Where is it with the buses and trains?
We ran a community-based campaign, and we got the engagement of the community.
Buses and trains.
The trains, mate, there was an agreement reached in the trains that's just been signed off that broke the first time the wages cap has been broken in this state. The first time. Yeah, mate. Yeah, and we didn't achieve a 2-day working week either, mate. But you know, you got to do what's realistic. No, I'm happy to answer this guy.
The workers never
Jefferson, you had your go. You had your go. So now you have to listen. You have to know how to listen as well as ask questions.
Well, ask him why the workers...
No. Whatever it is, you had your turn to ask question and they listened.
Still haven't seen the EBA details. It includes privatisation.
Now you have to show you are a good listener too.
No, it doesn't. It doesn't at all. And the thing is that the workers in this state, and that's why I say that movement does not equal just union. We are 10% of the workforce. We have institutional power, but it is at 10%. There's 90% of the workforce we have to organise. And shouting at people endlessly is not going to ensure that we grow a stronger workforce.
You've got 100% coverage of buses and trains. Why don't you answer that question?
Yeah, we do. Yes. Next question.
Well, why don't you answer it?
Anyway.
You can sell them out. What about privatisation of the buses?
Yeah, next question.
No, we can't go on like this if you interrupt. So can we have the next question, please? And please keep your question short and sweet.
Yeah, Brian Concannon. Yeah, I've been a scaffolder rigger most of my life, union member most of my life. Worked for AWU, BLF, BWIU, CFMEU. And I know that workers are a lot better off with unions. We'd be getting robbed blind with our wages and conditions if it wasn't for unions. Many times, or 3 times actually, I've complained to the union about getting ripped off, conditions, wages. Things got fixed up, but I got sacked shortly afterwards. It seems to be preconditioned these days. You don't get... But anyway, my question relates to the One World Government agenda that I'd just like to know your thoughts on. Do you think it's
part of the agenda to break down unions to have a universal wage class system. We've got to break down the wages of the Western nations, the prosperous nations, and bring up the wages of the third world nations so they're even on par. So it's, but to do that, they've got to break down their unions.
Well, Jesus, does he ever shut up? So yeah, obviously the strategy is to try and destroy unions, right? I mean, the one Mark talked about the Fair Work Ombudsman. If you go through this on a basic analysis, right? So what opportunities do you have for workers to be able to have some representation at work? At the moment, you can go it alone. You can get a lawyer if you've got the money. You can try and contact the Fair Work Ombudsman, who, you know, frankly, I don't think their interests naturally aligned to protect workers or provide proper advice, and B, they don't have the resources to do it. Or C, you can go it alone, and most of us know how that goes. Or the other option is a trade union, right? And so that's obviously been the single biggest threat to most businesses, particularly those that are incredibly sort of hardline. And so they've set upon an agenda for a long, long period of time. Well before I've been around, and it's been continuing on, and most people in this room know that union density has been declining for such a long period of time. To Mark's point, I think, you know, the things that need to start is you need to start changing the narrative and starting a conversation around the role of unions, what they can do, why they're important for the modern age. Not talking about the old things that happened in the past and the glory days and all the rest, about talking about what's important to most people, because most, fuck, he's still going. Most people that work in scaffolding and anything else in construction, they're more concerned about having a safe workplace, coming home to their family, making sure they get paid, making sure contractors don't go bust and fleece everyone. Those are the common things that people want to talk about. And so unions need to make sure that they can communicate that and they can represent people, and everyone's got a safe place to go to work on.
Joe Nagy from the committee. My background is my mother was a unionist, my father was a unionist, I was a unionist. I was in the first strike, in teacher strike in Sydney. The big problem you're facing now is what are you going to do in the future? And the only answer to that is you have to look at society and see where the needs are. Now, you had a professor from Syracuse University spoke at Sydney University at Sydney Ideas, and he mentioned, and this has also been mentioned by the Reserve Bank, of the growing gap between us. If this country keeps going the way it's going to go, we're going to be one hell of a damn mess. Anyway, that's the point I'm making. The next question is this. What has happened to firms like Domino's and 7-Eleven? I thought they broke the law. Why aren't those guys being charged, and why aren't they going to jail? They broke the law.
Absolutely. That is the point. And I think when I was speaking before about wage theft, the problem in this country is that wage theft has actually become a business model. It's being tolerated. And conservative governments, rather than spending time, and I know it's a dirty word, regulating, they're actually hell-bent on destroying unions. Now, I know that the union that covers 7-Eleven, every member they had in 7-Eleven, they didn't have a lot, but every member they had in 7-Eleven was being paid the appropriate award rates. That money and the money that was going into their bank account was at the appropriate rate, and they were getting pay slips. All those people, everyone else who was ripped off, none of them were union members, but every union member was getting the right amount of pay. And this goes back to that point, and I think that one of the points is the changing nature of work that you allude to. And we look at the gig economy, Fedora, all those things. We're entering a different way in which work operates. And unions need to adapt and be part of that. We can't, as much as we'd like to, we can't turn the internet off, and we can't stop innovation. But what we can do is that ensure that there is, in these economic developments, a social component to it. Every business that operates in these areas has a social responsibility. And one of the challenges with in the entrepreneurial community is, and we did it with Airtasker. Now, Airtasker has got, I don't know how many people know Airtasker, it's an online platform that does jobs. We got an agreement with them to advertise the minimum rates of pay, to offer information about work health and safety, They've developed an insurance product that allows people to get workers' compensation. And people say to me, and the critics say, oh, it's not enforceable, you haven't achieved this and you haven't achieved that. We never, ever said we were going to achieve that straight off. What we said is we did what unions always do. Establish a beachhead, set a standard, and then try to get that standard enforced in legislation and properly policed. One of the biggest problems with wage theft is unions used to have the ability to go into businesses and inspect wages books and check that workers were being paid properly. We're not allowed to do that anymore. We are only allowed to go in and check wages books if we have a member in the workplace and we can only look at that member's wages. And that's why you go back to 7-Eleven and only those who were union members were being paid correctly. And I know I won't steal Dan's fire, but Dan is doing an innovative project around hairstyles. He can talk about it. But the union movement is actually adapting. We are being forced to innovate ourselves. We have structures that are 1970s, 1950s. We have to actually have structures that keep up with young people. You look on the buses, everyone who's on a bus between 7 and 9 and between 5 and 7 at night are all on their phones. That's where the organising opportunities are now. I'm not saying just do it all online and do it by phone, but there has to be a combination of the new techniques with the one-on-one conversations. Because we know in the workplace, the only way in which you move someone from being a non-member to a member is one of their workplace leaders who they respect. And that person has a word to them and says, you should join a union, this is why people shift. We have to get into a headspace where we are doing that and being agile. Now, the other thing, and I know it's not going to be popular with my mate over here, but where businesses are operating and doing the right thing, have a good enterprise agreement, paying the proper wages and conditions, providing a safe work environment, and doing the right things, we should be congratulating them. We should be saying, this is the model that all businesses should be operating. Exactly. And this is the standard that we should actually have in the workplace. And we shouldn't be allowing these fly-by-nighter operators, particularly in your industry, labour hire cowboys, and particularly in construction and those areas, to come in and undercut people who are doing the right thing. And this government and conservative governments and all governments that the union movement needs to hold to account need to ensure that those conditions are there. I'll say one last thing. In the new economy, the entrepreneurs are very susceptible to brand damage. We have to ensure that they have a social conscience and a social focus in their businesses. You can't just take money and walk away from your communities. And this young people today are very susceptible to, if you can point out that those businesses are ripping people off, they won't buy their products. They will move. And they will shop online and they will change who they're shopping with. That's the sort of stuff that we need to start thinking about, and the union movement needs to link in with a consumer approach to the way in which we deal with these companies.
Thank you. I'm Geoffrey. I'm a member of the convening group of the Politics in the Pub and the Secretary of the Association for Good Government. And there's a comment going on that it's really the twilight of the unions. And one of the reasons, a couple of reasons for that is, the unions have chosen to participate in a playing field where it has a natural disadvantage, which is the commercialized nature of the electoral process. As long as you play that game, you stand to lose. You're at a natural disadvantage against a capitalist corporate system. A second reason is the growing automation. It's inevitable. And growing competition from the developing countries who are likewise raising their wages, but still. And the first world workers are going the opposite direction, trying to cut their wages. And the third reason would be a growing clamor for a universal basic income or outcome, which would remove from the bargaining table subsistence, the issue of subsistence between employer and employee. And that would force real entrepreneurs to compete for labor rather than compete in the currently designed labor market where workers are desperately competing for scarce jobs and pushing, through no fault of theirs, and having no choice, down the wages. So that was my question. How would you respond to those challenges that I cited? So
I'll cover off on automation. I'll let Mark cover off in terms of the sort of living wage, universal wage. So for us, for a lot of our industries, particularly in heavy manufacturing, we've been dealing with automation well before it's now become this sort of buzzword which is starting to roll out across the board. The real threat with automation is, particularly in the manufacturing industries, that it has been leading to downturn in employment, obviously maintaining and ramping up production for a lot of business. But I think we're fast coming to this transition where automation starts to provide a lot of the basic services that we do. One of the more interesting ones I heard more recently in terms of automation is in terms of HR services, human resources, where they're starting to automate a lot of those services in big companies to be able to provide automatic responses to employees in those companies, which I find ironic given we've been on the tail end of a lot of conversations with human resources making our members redundant as part of automation. The big test will be whether or not, I take the more sort of pessimistic side of this. I genuinely believe that automation is going to lead to significant losses in employment. There's a book which is called The sort of Rise of the Robots that sort of talk about the formation of artificial intelligence and a role in terms of basically providing services, artificial services. And one of the ones that I found interesting, albeit I know they're still working on the technologies, it's always been focused as how do you automate the high-end, high-paid jobs. That's always been the focus, or at least perceived focus. Over in the United States, they're automating burger flipping at the moment. And so for most of you will know that fast food industry in the United States is the lowest of the lowest paid, right? So for me, I'm probably a little bit more concerned than a lot of others. I actually think it's going to come through faster than what people think, probably because we've seen it a lot more in heavy manufacturing where it's been rolled out to do a lot of critical tasks that our members have otherwise done. So there's certainly a lot of challenges for the union movement. I know that the international GUF, so the International Global Union Federations, are doing a lot of work, particularly the International Transport Federation are doing a huge amount of work around automation, because the next big hit, and not to say a buzzword to get old mate fired up again, but the next big trouble will be particularly around drivers for trucks, for cars, for rail as well, where there's likely to be a lot more automation because where the technology's headed, and obviously a lot of warehouse and storage as well. So I think there's a lot of troubles ahead. I know a lot of people keep putting out a very optimistic view about it. I say good luck. I take a more pessimistic view about how do I secure our members' futures and make sure there's decent jobs for them going forward.
I'm a bit more positive than Daniel about the technology, because I think we should be using technology to improve human life and the lives that we actually exist with. I mean, one of the things is Singapore has always had driverless trains. No response, okay.
More deaths.
They're good. And recently, they've actually put drivers back into trains to ensure that the system is more reliable. I mean, you look at Uber lately in the States where they've just killed someone with a driverless car. So I think there's a long way to go in many of these sorts of things. But Dan's right, a lot of the sort of the lower level jobs, the repetitive jobs are being disappearing through technology. And the universal basic wage, I'm not sold on that yet. I saw a tweet the other day when someone was talking about it, and ACOS, the peak welfare body, said, well, the alternative to that is actually increasing the level of benefits that people get.
Let's do that first.
Rather than do that first, rather than actually go into a universal income. And also I think the level of training and the ability to engage people in a job is very important. I mean, people actually get their identity and who they are through their employment, participating in society through your employment. And I'm a great one for employment because I think that in the democratic process, you have to have a job to be able to participate and afford to be able to participate in that. My concern is if the universal social wage is that you put everyone on it.
I think you misunderstood what the universal basic income is. That's my comment.
No, I don't think, because I think the universal basic income is where you put people on sort of get the same amount of money to exist.
No, that's not. Sorry.
Well, that's the way it's been explained to me. I think people get their identity through work. I think people would rather work.
For themselves first.
Well,
For someone else.
yeah, well, for themselves first. And then.
The whole objective of the universal basic.
But however we do it, I think that you've got to remember that people get their identity from work, and work provides their identity within their communities, and it enables their communities to thrive because people are actually participating socially and politically. More social than political at the moment, but that's where we need to be. And I think the problem with government is that it is not facilitating the opportunities for people to get the training, the engagement, and to be able to participate. I mean, which is part of it. And I think that's where, I mean, I'm old enough to remember going to the CS to find a job on a job board. I mean, this government has deconstructed completely any avenues into employment. They vacated the space on regulating minimum conditions of employment and wages. And we as people need to take that stuff back. And we're going to have to do it as the economy changes, and particularly as these new levels of automation and jobs come in. But I think if people are equipped, people have the opportunity, people have the access to public education, private education, but then access to TAFEs, universities, whatever, they can actually get those jobs and participate in the economy. And if you look at the growing sectors, there are significant growing sectors. The administrative sectors, the care sectors, these are things that aren't going to become like robots. Health, absolutely. Health, tourism, all these sorts of areas. We have to be smart about the way in which we think about how we want to set our country up. The problem is the government currently thinks simply in electoral cycles of 3 years. That's going to get us nowhere. We've got to put the humanity back into what we're doing, and if we're going to do that, there have to be basic rights that are attached to individuals as workers that they take wherever they go in the economy.
So my question goes to the problem of the fall away of union membership over the years. So a lot of people are now stuck on casualised work, even though they might work almost full time. They're stuck on casualised work. There are people who live half on welfare and half on casualised work, and a lot of those people don't seem to be able to get into unions. Is that the case with your unions? And I was wondering if there's a way that unions can open themselves up to those people who are half unemployed or even mostly unemployed, and those people who are stuck on casualised work like the precariat, the so-called precariat. This is a big sector of the working population now, and a lot of young people are on that level. And are they able to actually join a union if they wanted to? Can your unions actually help cover their situation?
Yep, absolutely. We've got, so I guess it's a really good case in point. We've got lots of options in terms of people who work in labour hire, working casual, who are apprentices, who are seasonal workers. We've got a lot of different rates. I think the problem is, and we've talked about it quite a bit, unions are really terrible of actually being able to deliver a message about what is available for people. And I think that's a really big challenge, particularly for a lot of younger workers who you talked about are more likely to be in precarious work. For a lot of them, the answer is, I've got problems at work. The natural answer is not, I should join a union. And I think that's a big thing that we need to change. And, you know, as Mark pointed out, there's a lot of things that we're testing and we're trying to do. But until you can get to that point where you change that narrative to be able, that someone automatically, they've finished school, they're in their first job, they've got a problem, they should automatically know that the union is the best body to represent and help them at work. And until that happens...
But can you help them if they're not a member, and can you actually let them be a member? Because I've tried to become a member of unions.
Yep.
I work very casual.
Yep.
But I'd really like to be a member of a union. but I'm not able to, it seems, because I don't work enough hours.
So
That's the problem, and that is, I mean, this is what faces us in the
Yep.
future, possibly,
Yep.
is that people will be in and out of work
Yep.
a lot more, and so we really
Correct.
need to pull those people into unions
Yep.
somehow.
Absolutely. So it's a really, really good job. And apologies because I can only speak for the AWU, so I can give you our examples. But we've got traffic controllers who pick up one shift every 2-3 weeks, right? As an example, right? So we know what it's like for people who wake up in working for a labour hire company and wondering whether they're going to go to work, if they're going to get a call up. Like we completely understand what that's like, and we completely understand that then makes it hard to be locked into a sort of set high fee structure. Totally get that. But the bit that's the challenge, I can only say from our union is providing that flexibility, but making sure how do we help get a message out so enough people know that we do have those rates and that support in place to help people. So there is there's basically a union for every type of work, and either through Unions New South Wales or through Australian unions, through the ACTU, you can get in contact and you can generally get put in place in the right direction. Unfortunately, as has been the case before, sometimes you've got to be a bit persistent, but there are also other cases where people have pre-existing issues that some unions are hesitant to take people on. For obvious reasons. But from our point of view, we do understand the predicament, we do understand the reality of the modern day workforce, and we are certainly trying to structure ourselves up to help people.
Okay, thanks. I'm speaking as a fairly long-time union delegate in the CPSU in a call centre, which is pretty much the modern factory in some respects. And I think that the dilemma we face is a pretty fundamental one. To me, there's two graphs. If you look at recent Australian history, this is the graph of inequality, which is going up, and this is the graph of union density, which is going down, and they're absolutely counterpointed. So as the strength of the union movement purely in that sense has gone down, that's why inequality and wage loss has gone down. So the unions face this fundamental challenge. I know I don't have to tell you that. I know that you know that. But my feeling from my own experience is there's a myth out there that people are anti-union. They're not anti-union. They actually support unions, but in many cases they get the award, they get the EBA conditions without being a member. And you've just got to find a way of getting to them and convince them why joining the union is not only in their own interest, but in the collective interest. Somehow, I don't know what the trick is, new technology, but I really think it's face-to-face, actually. I think new technology is all very well. I don't think you can join too many members just through Facebook, especially with Mark Zuckerberg out there. Yeah, or what is it? Cambridge checking on everything. Okay, so I mean, that's one question. How do we resolve? This is a long-term problem, which is probably 50 years, isn't it? Or at least 30 or 40 years this problem's been going. Maybe since the Accord, but anyway, that's raising another issue. The second question is, where do we go from here? Because what's posed for us now is the Change the Rules campaign. And I was around at the time when the Your Rights at Work campaign was on. Somehow, the Your Rights at Work campaign brought down John Howard. That's a historical fact. The strength of that campaign, which I was involved in, and I know that we involved white-collar workers, blue-collar workers, all workers were involved in that campaign. We had a fantastic campaign and we actually brought down that government, and I hope that the Change the Rules campaign can do the same to the Turnbull government. I think it has that potential, but somehow we've got to, mobilise the workers and the community to do that. So my question is about the strategy that, what sort of campaign is going to be mounted, over the next 12 months. But beyond that, and my final point, is that the Your Rights at Work campaign, unfortunately, even though we brought down the Howard government, the incoming Labor government did not completely change the work choices system and left it as work choices light. And I
Thank
think
you.
that's part of the problem we face.
Thank
This
you.
time, we've got to make sure that any incoming Shorten government really does change the
Thank
system.
you. Now
Okay, thanks.
we'll hear from the speakers.
Absolutely right. I think the problem was in November, I think it was, when Rudd was elected, we all packed up our gear, put away the signs and said, oh, our job is done. I think the lesson that's been learnt by the union movement is that we have to campaign through elections, not to elections. So elections aren't the end in themselves, that we have to keep campaigning through them. I think one of the things that people have tonight touched on the decline of the union movement. Just want to point out that between 2014 to 2016, the number of union members in New South Wales grew by 30,000. That doesn't mean density improved, but the number of union members improved. And I think there is an appetite, you're absolutely right, out there for people to join a union and participate in their communities. I agree with the comment that was made that people won't just join online, and that's why I said you need to use online techniques in conjunction with the one-on-one talking in a workplace. But the problem with that is that today, particularly with caring roles and the rollout of the NDIS, there are services that are setting up where people get their jobs on their iPhone. They get a job offered, and if they don't take it within 60 seconds, it goes to the next person. And their role is dictated by their mobile phone. The question I pose then is, how do we organise people who are actually never in a workplace with a whole lot of other workers? Technology is growing rapidly, and we have to be agile, and we have to be participating in that and thinking about how we actually organise that way as well. And I think it's important that we remember that if we're going to organise as a union member, we don't just do it in the workplace. And I say, when I talk to unionists, and I was speaking to delegates today and organisers today, that we have to talk union not just in our workplaces, but in our churches, in our clubs, in our pubs, in our sporting groups. We have to get back to being prepared to talk politics. I mean, that's...
Forget the Hillsong Church, you're very active there.
I think that's the Liberal Party who's very active there, brother. But it is, you're right. And the bottom line is, as a union member, we have to keep campaigning. We have to use old skills that we know one-on-one. We have to use new technology, and we can't be beholden to elections. They have to be seen as blips on the radar. We have to keep campaigning through it. And whoever gets into government, we have to hold them accountable, and we have to campaign to ensure that the rights of working people are protected.
My name's Holger Kofod. I joined a union in 1969 till 5 years ago when I retired, which was not my choice. I would be a union member now if there was some means for retired ex-workers to stay in touch with their union. Teachers and Siemens union have that. Now, in all my years, I have never seen working conditions go backwards as far and as fast as it did under the Hawke-Keating governments. And I say it's time we kicked the Labor Party into shape or started a new party. And also, I think unions should have their own newspaper. Either start a newspaper or buy shares in the Packer or Murdoch papers and make sure we get a fair go in the media. When is the union movement going to take a little bit of innovative action and start creating conditions for people?
Thank you.
So just really quickly, so depending on the industry, I know quite a few unions have got retired members networks. We've got huge retired members networks, particularly with the sort of up in the steelworkers areas. We've got up in the Newcastle region, down in Port Kembla, and we've got one in Sydney. So we've got 3 separate retired members networks that meet annually for a big event towards the end of the year. So we do.
I didn't mean just a social event.
Yep, and I know there are, for us, and I know for others, certainly engage with our retired members to get them to participate in events. We're engaging with our retired members to turn up to all the May Day events. And I know Mark can probably touch on some of the broader retired members' dues that are around the place as well. So there are plenty of opportunities. I'm not sure which union you're a member of, apologies, but so with ASU? Yep. Yeah, Sydney Water, yeah.
Yes.
Okay. So, yeah, from an AW perspective, yes, definitely, and I know there's some things more broader.
Come and see me later and I'll give you the phone number of one of my colleagues who runs the retired members group at Unions New South Wales. I can guarantee, and I've met with these people, it's not a go out to the restaurant on the big minibus and back home. These retired members are active in all our campaigns. They go to rallies, they hand out, they participate actively. It's a great group. Mary Yeager took it over 2 years ago. It's now tripled in size. They meet, I think it's the first Monday of the month, but I'll give you a phone number to ring. And I guarantee they will keep you busy and active, engaged in a whole lot of political activities, and you'll probably actually beg to stop being taken to activities and engaged in the political environment. I guarantee it won't be a minibus and a bistro.
Thank you. So that concludes this session of Politics in the Pub. So ladies and gentlemen, please thank the 2 speakers for their excellent talk as well as their excellent answers. Now, next week, the topic is Australia's energy policy. How did we get so ripped off? So same place, same time. See you all. And thank you. Thank you both.